Hey everybody. Today we're going to talk about toxicity, negativity. Very specifically, we're going to talk about toxic people in our lives. This is sort of a spin-off from some of my previous videos where I've talked to you guys about creating happiness. And in that video, we talked about how toxicity can be a big barrier for you if you are wanting to create some happiness in your life. So today we're gonna zoom in on that a little bit. We're gonna talk very specifically about toxicity. So, what is toxicity? Probably the best synonym for it is negativity. Toxicity and negativity seem to go hand in hand. And I talk in that previous video about how the toxicity in your life that might be a barrier to happiness could be an environment. This is the case a lot of times. A lot of times we find ourselves in toxic environments. It might be that we're in a toxic home, and that's a tough situation to be in, and that can be for a lot of reasons. It might be the atmosphere, the people that you live with. It could be a lot of things. Sometimes it's not always home. Sometimes it's work. I talk to so many people, not just clients, but just people that I know in my life who work in very toxic environments. And this can be a huge negative in your life. It can breed such unhappiness. It's interesting in the way that we think about building and creating happiness. There's lots of things in our lives that, either they're beyond our control or they're within our control, but they can also breed and create unhappiness. And a toxic work environment is certainly one of those things. So, toxic environments are a big deal. They can be a huge barrier to you if you're trying to create some happiness in your life. Now, some of these environments, we can't do anything about. You may be in a toxic work environment that you have absolutely no power in. And if that's the case, then you have to look at a couple of things. You've got two options if you're in that situation. You can either try to change where you work, basically, and I know that's not very easy, especially right now with COVID and everything that's going on. If you're lucky enough to still have a job, it's not a very mobile job market right now. But let's think long term. If you truly are in a very toxic work environment and you have no power there whatsoever to make any changes to the environment, honestly, your best option is to leave and go somewhere else. So that's something you'd have to look at very closely. Now, if that's just not a possibility, if you truly are stuck in this place, in this job, whatever it may be, and that may be the case for people, especially right now. So, long term, maybe you've got some options, but right now, just because of the pandemic and everything, maybe you really are stuck. If that's the case, what you really need to do is try to figure out the best way to cope with the toxic environment, to sort of accept it in the moment. Doesn't mean you got to accept it forever, but to sort of accept it for what it is in the moment, to cope with it, and in a lot of ways to compartmentalize. And as we get deeper into these videos, you guys are going to figure out that I'm big on the concept of compartmentalizing. It can be an unhealthy coping mechanism, but it can also be a very healthy and positive coping mechanism. It's all in how you use it. So, if you are stuck for right now in a very toxic work environment that's causing a lot of unhappiness, you might have to just figure out how to cope with it for the time being. Accept it for what it is, try to make the best of it, and just thank your lucky stars that you're not there 24 hours a day, okay? Because at some point you do get off and you do go home, right? It's not your whole life, or at least it shouldn't be. So that's on toxic environments. Excuse me, I'm having a camera situation here, but The other environment that's a little more tricky is a home. If you're in a toxic home environment, um, you generally you are home a lot more than you're at work or anywhere else, especially right now. With the pandemic and people quarantining and social isolation, it's really shining a spotlight on people's home lives. A lot of people are not used to spending a lot of time at home or spending most of their time at home. Usually, when people aren't working, they run around a lot. I know I sure do, and most of the people that I know, and I bet a lot of you guys do too. We're at home at night, for sleeping, and I mean we do have certain things and days that we like to be at home, but we're kind of a society that runs around a lot and doesn't spend that much time at home. But the last 6 months, a lot of us have been really stuck at home. A lot of people have lost their jobs and they're at home. There's a lot of people like me who are working from home. So instead of going into an office every day, I'm stuck here at my house, and I have been for months. And the other thing is, families are stuck together at home, and that's a new dynamic for some families. The modern families today are going off in a lot of different directions. Spouses are going to different jobs and places to work. Kids are typically going off to school, they're going to play sports, they're doing this, they're doing that. And the average modern family doesn't spend that much time together at home. So, the last 6 months have been very eye opening. They have shined a spotlight on home and home life, and especially for couples and families. And if you are in a toxic home, wow, this has been devastating for some people. I mean, I'm seeing clients and people and talking to a lot of people who did not realize how screwed up their home was until them and their entire family were stuck there for the last 6 months. So a toxic home is a little bit trickier, and homes can be toxic for lots of reasons. Of course, they're toxic because of the people in them, right? Either you've got maybe one toxic person in the house that's kind of ruining it for everybody. You might have multiple toxic people. Toxicity has a way of breeding and growing. It's like a fungus. And it could be for lots of things. Maybe you've got somebody who has a mental health issue. There may be substance abuse in the home. There might be abuse. Not just physical abuse or sexual abuse, but there's a lot of emotional abuse that runs through families. Sometimes people don't even realize they're doing it, but they can be quite abusive, verbally and emotionally. So there's lots of things that can make a home toxic. And what can you do about it? Now, that gets into some really big issues. I think with any change within a home, within a family, it takes a lot of work. It takes a lot of open communication. If you're able within your home, within your family, to talk to each other and communicate openly, and people are willing to listen, then the prognosis is good. You guys might be able to improve things on your own. But if things are pretty bad, pretty far gone, and the communication is just not open, people are just not really willing to listen and to work, you can try therapy, things like that. I find that when people are not open, a lot of times therapy is not that successful. If they don't want to listen to their spouse or their parent or their child, they may not want to listen to me or another therapist. So in a toxic home, you might have to make some very tough decisions. It could be a situation. If it's a relationship, I mean, maybe you need to explore that relationship. Is it the healthiest one for you to be in? And maybe not. So toxic environments can be kind of tricky. We can find ourselves in these situations a lot of times through no fault of our own. And then sometimes what's interesting is we might be the toxic element in an environment. And that's not to say that you're a terrible person or anything like that, but sometimes we get really overcome with negativity. And if our negativity starts radiating out and affecting other people in the environment, we might actually be the toxic element, which is easily corrected if you recognize it and you're willing to work on it. So that's on environmental toxicity. However, when we pull it back to creating happiness and addressing barriers to happiness, a lot of times the toxic issue is other people. It's toxic people, and we all are familiar with that term. I'd say we've probably all experienced toxic people in one way or another in our lives. I don't know anybody who I can think of who would say they've never had to deal with a toxic person in their life. And if you are one of those people, congratulations. Lucky you, really, because toxic people are a handful. Whenever the toxic person in your life is somebody that's not super close to you, maybe it's just an acquaintance, maybe it's a coworker, or something like that, it's a little easier to deal with. It's much easier to minimize those people. Where we get into some really tough situations, some happiness crushing situations, is when the toxic person in your life is a very close person, a lot of times a family member, somebody that you love. I see a lot of people in therapy who have a toxic parent. Now, these might be kids, which makes it trickier for me as the therapist. But a lot of times it's adults. It's adults that I see in therapy who've grown up with a toxic parent. Sometimes it's two toxic parents, which is tragic for that person usually. But a lot of times it's an adult who's grown up with a toxic parent, and that toxic parent is still in their life wreaking havoc. And it's hard to see it when it's somebody that you're really, really close to. You might know that person makes you feel bad whenever you interact with them, that they tend to make you feel bad about yourself, that you tend to be, discontent and unhappy, when you have dealings and interactions with that person. But you might not have thought it all the way out to the level of realizing that the person is really toxic. And they're probably damaged in some way themselves. I see this a lot in the parent-child dynamic. I'll have adult clients who have grown up with a toxic parent. That toxic parent is still in their lives, making them feel bad, squashing their efforts to create happiness. And when you start to dig down into the deep-rooted family dynamics, you'll come to realize that parent is damaged in some way. They've maybe been abused as a child or suffered some great loss or trauma or something like that, and they've become toxic. They've become toxic, and they're radiating that toxicity out to the people around them, especially the ones closest to them, because honestly, that's who's the most susceptible to it. So what do we do about toxic people? Especially when it's somebody that we love. And it's not always a parent. I see that dynamic quite often. But it might be a sibling. It might be a close friend. You might have a lifelong friend, even a childhood friend who you come to realize is toxic. It could even be a spouse, and that can be kind of a heartbreaking situation. But really, it could be anybody in your life. You're most susceptible to it when you're very close to the person. So what do you do about this? What do you do when somebody that you love is toxic and is kind of crushing your happiness in a lot of ways? I would say, a lot of people get really nervous and say, well, I can't just throw away my mother. And I know it's a stereotype. Everybody thinks that the therapist always blame the mother. So, I'm not going along with that stereotype necessarily. I'm just using that as an example. But, a lot of people say, well, I can't just cut her off. She's my mom. I can't just, never see her again or never talk to her again. And I don't feel that it has to be that drastic. I think the first step is when somebody's doing and saying things and behaving in a way that's hurting you, that's harming you, I think, especially when it's somebody that's very close to you, I think you need to have a conversation with that person, right? You need to give them the option to change their behavior. Doesn't mean that they're going to, and oftentimes they won't. But it's not impossible. So you need to give them that option, and you need to have a conversation with them. Now, you don't need to have a screaming match where you yell at them and tell them they're toxic, but you just need to identify the behavior that they're exhibiting and explain to them how it makes you feel. And how you'd like for that to change, and try to do it in a calm and loving way, and maybe frame it as though this can help you guys strengthen your relationship, which really it can. If they're compliant with what you're asking, it can strengthen your relationship. So I think that's got to be the first step if this is someone you care about and you have a true desire to try to maintain some type of relationship with them. Now, that is step one. If step one is not successful, then you've got to take further action. So if you talk to the person, express yourself calmly and rationally in a loving way, and either they outright resist you, or a lot of times what'll happen is they'll say, oh yes, I understand, I'm so sorry. Okay, you'll seem like you'll think it will seem like they're getting it. Okay, like, wow, this conversation was a huge success and things are going to be better. But then what happens is they don't really change any of the behavior, and you just kind of start the cycle of toxicity all over again. So for however it turns out, however they respond, if it ends up being that talking to them didn't work, I think the next step that you have to take is minimization. And I talk about this a lot with clients in therapy about how to minimize negative relationships, how to minimize negative interactions, how to minimize negative people, and basically how to minimize toxicity. You can have a very close friend, loved one, family member, and maintain a relationship with them. Okay, you can maintain a connection with them, but you can minimize that relationship. Now, eventually they will probably pick up on the fact that they've been minimized in some way. They might not quite be able to put their finger on it, but they will eventually kind of catch on that you've minimized them to a certain degree, and there may be a little fallout from that, but you do it in such a way that it's not overt. You don't have a big fight with them. You don't tell them I'm minimizing you, or anything like that, because that just breeds drama. And it breeds discontent and animosity and problems in the family if this is a family member. You don't do it that way. You just do it quietly. It's just something that you do. You don't reach out as much. You don't reach out as often. When they reach out and try to engage, especially in negative ways, you keep those engagements brief. You be loving, you be cordial, you be nice, you be friendly, but you keep things brief. And this is something that will take some practice, because a lot of times these toxic people are good at sucking you in. So it might take a little while to extricate yourself from that somewhat and to get really good at minimization. But that is generally step two. Now, that is the step that usually will work. If you're consistent with it, if you keep practicing it, eventually those people and those relationships will reach a minimized status in your life. They'll still exist, but they won't quite take up as much space. Therefore, they will not have as much power to affect your overall happiness and your ability to create happiness. Now, In some instances, and I wish that I could say this was rare, but honestly, it's not that rare. In some instances, even minimization will not be enough. You will have some people in your life who are so toxic that they will pick up on your minimizing behavior and they will resist it big time. They will really crank up the volume on their toxicity. And when that happens, you may have to cut them off. And this is hard. It is very difficult when people get to this point with someone in their life, especially if it is, somebody that they care about a lot. But, if minimizing doesn't work and this person is, undermining your efforts to have a happy life, to have peace, and some contentment in your life, especially if they pick up on the minimization efforts and they really crank up the old toxicity, you might have to cut them off, and that can be difficult. It can be painful. This is where you may get into a big blow up with somebody. You might have to be very forceful with them. You might have to block somebody, on social media, or from calling or getting in contact with you. Hopefully it will not get to this point. Like I said, I wish I could say this was rare, but I couldn't say that it's rare. I'll say it's infrequent. It's a lot less likely to happen than the second scenario, to where you'd be able to just minimize a relationship. But it does happen. I mean, I see it, somewhat regularly, where, these relationships just go completely off the rails and you do have to cut somebody off, and it's painful. But when you get in a situation like that, you have to really ask yourself, do you sacrifice your happiness for this toxic person to have what they want, in order for them to be able to behave any old way that they want and treat you any kind of way that they want? Are you willing to sacrifice your happiness? And why is their happiness, if being toxic makes them happy, so to speak, why is their happiness more important than yours? I think you have to ask yourself that question. And you've got to really prioritize your happiness, because look, at the end of the day, we are each responsible for ourselves. We are each responsible for our own happiness. And nobody else is going to do it for us. I mean, this concept, this notion of making other people happy, or that someone else can make you happy, it's false. It doesn't really work that way. You've got to take responsibility for your own happiness, and sometimes you've got to take action that might not feel totally comfortable. It might feel a little bit foreign to you when you're dealing with these toxic people. So it takes work, it takes effort, it takes a little practice. And if this is something that you're really struggling with, like a lot of things that I'm going to be talking to you guys about on here, I would encourage you to go talk to a therapist. I spend a lot of time when I'm working with clients, coaching them on how to get through these kind of situations. And sometimes it is just very helpful, rather than dealing with this all on your own and trying to figure it all out on your own. Sometimes it's helpful to have somebody to coach you a little bit and help you work through it. So anyway, that is my spiel today about toxicity and toxic people. So, let me know what you think. Drop a few lines in the comment section if this was helpful. If anybody has any feedback or any further questions or anything like that, just let me know. And if you have any requests for future videos, go ahead and drop those down in the comments too. I'd love to hear some of the things that you guys would like to talk about. Just a sneak peek, excuse me, I'm scratching my nose, sorry. Just a sneak peek preview of some topics that I'm thinking about talking about. I am going to continue to do a few little videos here and there as a follow-up to the Creating Happiness, like today, talking about some very specific things. But I think I'm also going to do a video, or maybe even a couple of videos, about anxiety and how to treat it, like coping skills and some things that we can do. I see such a rise in anxiety and anxiety disorders. And then something else, another idea that I've kind of been toying with. Initially, I had not really thought or planned about doing any videos about love and relationships. I don't know why, but hadn't thought of it. But you know what? I think I'm going to, because that's a part of most people's lives. Even if you're not in love or in a relationship, most people want to be, or maybe they have been and they've had bad experiences. And, I spend a lot of time sitting in session with clients and they're talking to me about love and relationship issues. So I am by no means a love or relationship guru, but I've been in love a few times and been in tons of relationships. We won't even go into all that. We might go into it a little bit in the video. But yeah, I think I may do maybe even a small series of videos about love and relationships, and give you guys an opportunity to maybe even put some questions forward. So if anybody has anything in particular that they'd like me to focus on, go ahead and drop that in the comments too. So, okay, I'm going to wrap it up because this video's already gone longer than I wanted it to, and I've promised you guys to try to keep these things as brief as I can. So go ahead and give me a thumbs up if you like this, and subscribe. That way you won't miss any of these upcoming videos. All right, talk to you guys later.